listeners, to another episode of Roll Off a Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Zendexor, and my teammates are Nikita Zuev and XJ. On this occasion, we shall be discussing not one but two of Clark Ashton Smith's short tales, one from the far past and one from the far future. Both of them masterpieces of English prose. In their very different ways, they each narrate the arrival and the defeat of an evil power. The Coming of the White Worm is one of the 10 stories in Smith's cycle of yarns set on the ancient and mythical northern continent of Hyperborea. Dwelling by the seashore, Evagh the warlock notes many strange portents, accumulating hints that a mysterious doom is on its way, a freezing supernatural menace beyond Evagh's power to divine or resist. Then one morning he awakes to find that his granite house has been relocated onto a huge iceberg, and he hears a knocking at his door. 2 wizards have come to inform him that he is now upon the ice mountain home of Shaikoth, a being from the spaces beyond the north, whose practice it is to acclimatize a chosen few to his coldness, so that they may serve and worship him, while he intends to blast with a chill splendor the rest of humanity. Evagh feels he has no choice but to cooperate, so he undergoes the initiation and becomes one of the 8 worshippers of Shaikoth, who turns out to be a fat worm-like thing on a throne, dribbling blood-coloured globules from his eye sockets. The days pass and the ice mountain drifts south, freezing one coastal community after another. Meanwhile, every day the worm's worshippers come to the throne room and make their obeisance to the monster. Evagh notes that day by day the number of worshippers decreases and the size of the worm increases. Clark Ashton Smith, in his inimitable way, says that Evagh was somewhat disquieted and that in conversation with his fellow worshippers, covertly he asked what manner of nutriment was required by Shaikoth. None of them really knows, and when one of them dares to ask the worm, he gets an ambiguous answer. Finally, the day comes when Evagh is the only one left alive, and the worm is so bloated that it cannot move. Voices come from within its belly, the voices of those whom it has consumed. Evagh is told that he can now slay the thing, though he himself must perish in so doing. And so he does. And a final passage in the story describes how, from afar, the ice mountain is seen by witnesses to collapse. Now to contrast the mood of this tale with that of Empire of the Necromancers, one of 16 stories set in the far future continent of Zathik. Whereas the earlier story is full of pale ice, this one is full of tawny gloom. Matmuor and Sodosma are necromancers. Driven from a land which rejected their evil practices, they flee into a desert realm whose people had died ages ago of a plague. The necromancers revive those of the dead whom they choose to serve them, and install themselves as joint rulers in the old capital city Lethlirion, revelling in macabre fashion amid a throng of animated corpses. The dead derive no joy from their unhallowed resurrection. To quote, "They spoke, they moved, they ate and drank as in life. They heard and saw and felt with a similitude of the senses that had been theirs before death, but their brains were enthralled by a dreadful necromancy. They recalled but dimly their former existence, and the state to which they had been summoned was empty and troublous and shadow-like. Dumbly they obeyed the dictates of their tyrannous lords, without rebellion or protest, but filled with a vague, illimitable weariness such as the dead must know, when having drunk of eternal sleep, they are called back once more to the bitterness of mortal being." They knew no passion or desire or delight, only the black languor of their awakening from lethe and a grey, ceaseless longing to return to that interrupted slumber. Now, just as in the earlier story, the white worm grows fat and incautious, so in this one, the two necromancers overdo things as they wallow in their indulgence. And they don't know it when a dim rebellion finally does occur in the dazed mind of Illyro, youngest of the rightful emperors who ruled the country of old. Illyro confers with one of his ancestors, and together they act out an ancient prophecy whereby they find the means to slay the necromantic tyrants and allow themselves and their fellow victims to regain the mercy of oblivion. This mercy is denied to Matmur and Sodosma, whose quartered bodies, having been hacked in pieces, ever after crawl helplessly to and fro in Lethlirion. So I've given the whole plot away, but the plot is never really the point in Clark Ashton Smith. It's the totally gorgeous language in which the stories are written. So let me pass the floor, if I can pass the floor to Nikki.
Sure. Yeah. I think not exactly sure how we should structure this discussion, but I guess I'll just go from one story, and then we can all discuss the story, and then we'll talk about the second story. With obviously, if any thoughts of comparison come to mind, we can do that. But so the coming of the white worm is an interesting tale, which is something that I say very often. But this time, I mean that positively. I think the coming of the white worm takes such an interesting perspective that not many other tales take. Usually, we never get to see these behind the scene interactions between one bad guy and another bad guy. If you're going to be serving something that's, you know, an all consuming white worm, you're definitely not a good guy. I can imagine this being a tale about Conan, where he goes into the icy mists and he finds out about all these mages and sorcerers who have been slowly giving away their lives to this worm. And he meets one of them who tells him about this thing and how he doesn't want to do it, how he wants to cut this, he wants to sever the deal, and Conan must help him with it, or by gods, he will kill him. And the two of them do it, and then the sorcerer betrays him, and Conan kills him, right? But here, Conan doesn't exist. So the bad guy has to deal with the other bad guy somehow. And we even get the feeling that he's a person that feels sorrow for the fact that all these other people who he has come to have perished because of this white worm. And the inner conflict within him is also interesting, because at first he is he's so happy that he has survived this cold, doesn't realize that the worm has just basically picked out a worse fate for him just later, right? And the juxtaposition of him having these thoughts surface and have to deal with them, well, it's stuff of legends. Really, really well written. Great, great fantasy fiction. Actually, what did you think of the coming of the white worm?
I think it is quite possibly the first Clark Ashton Smith story that I don't really have a good feeling for. It's not one that particularly struck me as engaging. First of all, I did find the Empire of Necromancers to be far better written story than the coming of the White Worm myself. So that inevitably is going to color whatever I feel about both of the stories. What I don't really like about the coming of the White Worm is, I'm very stingy with names in a story, and Clark Ashton Smith threw in a lot of names that he did nothing with in this particular story, unless it is covered in the rest of his saga dealing with the Hyperboreal continent that of Mutulan or something like that. This coming of the White Worm is set in the same universe as the other story, the Door to Saturn story, right? Yeah. So unless it's covered, unless those names were talked about, explained, and had screen time, so to speak, in those other stories, like in this particular one, they're just like thrown in one after another, and the naming is very it's very in the style of just taking syllables together, string them up, and then throwing them into the story. It that's not to say that it doesn't work. The problem is if nothing else is done with those names except just throwing them into the broth, then they're not going to stick at all to me. And that is how I feel about, first of all, the coming of the White Worm. And I don't particularly enjoy the ending. It's like, it's, to me, so the ending is apparently all this story is told secondhand through conjuring up the ghost of Evagh, the slayer of the White Worm, because he died in the process, years and years later. Some necromancer conjured up his spirit, and then the stories relate to him. To me, that is like, and he woke up and it's all a dream. I just don't like that kind of vehicle. I think it's very cheap, and I don't know, man. This perception I have of the coming of the White Worm is inevitably going to color whatever else I feel about it, unfortunately. The Empire of Necromancers, on the other hand, I feel is a much more well-crafted tale. Yeah. Back to you guys.
Yeah, Robert, what about you? What did you think of the coming of the White Worm?
Well, I've got, I'm going to give it 10 out of 10. I think it's a perfect story. I don't really understand the objections that XJ has made, because the richness of the names it's like when you're walking around an interesting landscape, you see all sorts of things in your peripheral vision that you haven't got time to look at square on. And the extra names are, if you like, the part of the music of the thing, the peripheral auditory equivalent of vision. Incidentally, some of them do figure in the other Hyperborean tales, but I don't think that's really the point. I think the point is that even if they didn't, it would still, they're doing no harm, and they're actually doing some good, adding some color to the story. But I suppose if you've got a sort of intelligence that has to pursue every clue, then you might be made restless by that. I haven't got that kind of brain myself.
I think, Robert, if I were to, from my understanding of the situation, if I were to give it a metaphor, as I like to do, you are the curator of art pieces, and you're walking around the museum, enjoying every which painting you see without really stopping. And then
Yeah.
maybe XJ in this example is the person who's putting the art museum together, all these rooms. And he's like, yeah, well, what's the purpose of this 16th century painting being next to this 19th century painting that doesn't do anything for the room? And and somebody to him says, it looks pretty. It's nice to look at. And he's like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like he's trying to find meaning in it.
I would
Yeah.
go with a much more prosaic explanation. You have a stew, some ingredients go together, some don't. And if you are going to use an ingredient that doesn't really go well with the others, you have to know exactly what you're doing. So, you want to put lots of sugar into a very savory stew. You gotta know what you're doing, man. Yeah, that's basically it.
Uh,
The names just don't go
Mhm.
because
They're proper names. They're not like if he said,
no. Okay,
Birmingham and
okay.
Clapham.
It's so my metric for doing this kind of stuff is if you take all those names out, will the story lose anything in particular? And my answer is no. The story won't lose anything if you take all those names out. So which means that they are all superfluous. They are not necessary to the story.
Well,
and
not everything is about the
yes,
story.
yes. But like as I said all the way in the beginning, this is just my take. I'm very miserly with names in my story.
And we're trying to have a discussion regarding
yeah,
your
and
take.
this is just how I feel about the story with names that are thrown unnecessarily into the mix, and yeah, it's just why
Well,
I don't like it.
another point, XJ, that you made was that it's a bit like a dream story because it's Evagh the warlock dies and his spirit is conjured up by Ibon later. Well, it's not actually a dream. It's more like discovering a manuscript where a story has been written, and like I suppose happens in quite a few stories, probably H.P. Lovecraft, things like that. You discover something in a record, and it's a record.
I mean, yes. What I meant to say is it's in the vein. It's in that kind of style where you start the story in one way and then at the end it's all suddenly not so first of all, my issue with the story is that it's all written in a very visceral way for Evagh, and then it all turns out to be just a retelling of a tale at the end by the conjuration of his spirit. It's like you could I would have much preferred it if that particular vehicle is done in a way where right from the beginning you have signs that this is not actually happening right there and then, like this is a retelling, and as the story goes on, then there's more of that being blended into the story. What I don't particularly like about having that twist, so to speak, at the end is it just feels like a essay that a high school kid might have written. That's just how I feel.
Well, it's a little hard to continue the discussion from this point of view, but I think we could go on a different angle and look at the coming of the White Worm as a genre piece, because this is sword and sorcery. So there's a lot of genre tropes that sort of get flipped on their head, and you get to see it from the other side, as I've before mentioned. For example, all the bad guys coming together and having a nice meal, basically, with one another, waiting for the great worm to tell them what to do next. It's very interesting and kind of comedical if you are in the know of these type of stories. Um, and what's particularly funny to me is that this story was written way before a lot of these tropes became tropes. So in a certain way, Clark Ashton Smith is accidentally making parody of what will come later, right? Because these bad sorcerers, they don't take themselves each other as seriously as one would imagine sorcerers would take themselves. They have conversations. They they have little meetings. They serve the worm from day to day. Sometimes they just sleep and don't do anything. It's it's really endearing. It's really fun to just see a daily life of bad guys. It was a very enjoyable aspect for me.
I mean, on that score, it's not too bad. I think it's a little bit like one of those disaster stories, Event Horizon, perhaps. A bunch of people trapped in a derelict ship, and then they're trying to figure things out, and then slowly, one by one, they all get picked off, or aliens, while they try to discover what exactly it is, what situation exactly they are in, and they try to survive or whatever. So in that respect, I think that story is that part of the story is quite all right. Yeah, I don't know. It's just hard for me to draw any sort of comparison between the coming of the White Worm and the Empire of Necromancers, to be perfectly honest, because they're quite different stories and the setup is very different. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the other story that we're discussing today, and that would be the before mentioned, as I have shortened it, Necromancers, or Necromancer. And this is I think it's on the same quality as the coming of the White Worm, maybe even better in some ways. Actually, in fact, better in a lot of ways, because once again, it is a genre-defining situation where we're focusing on the bad guys and not so bad guys, right? But they're all still pretty awful. One of the protagonists of the story is an undead person that doesn't have any feelings anymore, and to me, that was fascinating and something that I discussed offline with Robert, where it would be a really cool idea to do just a complete short story, not just half of it, but a complete short story in the mind of an undead creature, and see whether or not anything is happening there, and what could that pertain, and give it some life. Excuse the pun. Yeah. The Empire of the Necromancers starts with two men who have been sent out to their death somewhere far away where they will no longer cause any trouble. And then, gleefully, they find a way to rise again. But they take too much time in their rise. If they immediately used these forces and went back for their revenge, maybe we would be reading a very different story. But these necromancers are lazy. They're only planning and plotting about what they are going to do. And to me, the spirit of the tale really comes from the fact that these guys don't really understand the type of resilience the people they have resurrected have. Their culture, how much they have been wounded by this, and how much are they willing to fight the spells that have been put upon them in order to regain their freedom, even if that freedom is in death. And it's a really powerful message done very quickly. This is one of those short stories that is both short, brilliant, and I really could not add anything to it. This may be a spoiler for the viewers. I mean, I will be keeping the Coming the White Worm score close to my chest, but this is a 10 out of 10 story. It's got nothing that I could change myself personally that would make it better. That's seldom so in my brain, as we've seen in the past 60 plus episodes. I always have a gripe. I always have something. I always think that I have a better idea. And sometimes, just like a broken clock, I'm right, and I do have a better idea. But tonight, I surrender to Clark Ashton Smith. I lay down my sword and I say, Clark, I have been beaten. It's a fantastic tale. I've got nothing else to add, to be honest. I mean, I will talk about what I love about it, but as far as that, it'll be very hard for me to accept any criticisms of the tale. I will protect it with my life. Anyway, back to you, fellas.
Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 story, certainly. Yeah, and it's and one among a few examples in Smith's work where he does give the point of view of the dead. I mean, there's a longer story, Necromancy and Nat, where he does the same thing. Although in that story, the hero starts out by still being alive, but it describes what happens to him after he's killed by the Necromancers. But anyway, yeah, 10 out of 10, certainly. XJ, what do you think?
Well, I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10, but I do like it a lot. And the thing that I particularly like a lot is that how do I say this? It's like Clark Ashton Smith took a concept. What if two necromancers raised an entire empire of the dead to do their bidding? And he really rolled with it. And it's like you get scenes of you get very detailed, well, not very detailed actually, but he went into every aspects of what that empire would look like, especially there's even necrophilia in it, I think.
All right, yeah.
I find that the fact that he went into all this little stuff, like the little stuff that two necromancers would have in their empire of the dead, is absolutely delicious, if I might use the word, to me, in a story, because he's really getting into that role and really describing what an empire like that would look like. And he didn't just do it from the point of view of the necromancers. He did it also from the point of view of the dead subjects. In particular, the young king and his ancestors. He went into quite a bit of trouble to sort of portray how their mindset works, like how very, very slow they think. It's not that they're stupid, but it was very hard to push through that apathy that the state of undeath brings to them, as well as the binding of the spells that the necromancers have used on them. And it makes for great atmosphere, because you feel how lethargic everything is, but also how really high stakes everything is as well, and the effort used to push through that to get to the resolution to defeat the two necromancers. And I feel like all of this paints a very wonderful atmosphere around this concept, which is not something you would find a lot of people would do. Like, they could paint out, to me it's like method acting. You really have to step into the shoes of these two necromancers, what makes them tick, the kind of really disgusting fantasies they've got, and then make all that come out. Yeah, I really quite like that part. The only thing I don't I feel is a miss, and is why it's not a 10 out of 10 story, is the resolution of the story, which is the way to defeat the necromancers feel a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina to me. It's like, oh wow, I kind of need to have a way for the people in this empire to defeat the necromancers. I'm just gonna put this ancient prophecy right there, and then they can go and do the thing, and the necromancers will be taken care of. That's why it's not a 10 out of 10. But everything else about the story, the atmosphere, the characterizations of the necromancers, as well as the undead subjects, they are all really, really superb to me.
Well, I guess the ancient prophecy was a case of backward causation. That is to say, the necromancers being so disastrously bad caused somebody in the past with access to the timeline, to say, this is going to happen, so we'll have to take steps to ensure that when it does happen, something can be done about it.
Yeah, I mean, that actually makes me want to know more about the person who prophesied the coming of the two necromancers, to be honest. It must be a pretty powerful seer.
Yeah, but he is. Yeah, well, you can write a sequel, or a prequel rather.
The Empire of the Dusk.
So I have a question for Robert. You said that both of the stories are set in like they both have their own settings in which further tales are sort of crafted. Am I right? So we had a taste of the Door to Saturn about Mutulan.
Hyperborea, yes.
Yes.
So and Zethra, which was one of our early podcasts, was another of the Zathic tales.
Okay.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. I did not know that. Yeah.
We just echoed each other.
Yeah, Zethra is a very good story. I liked it.
Wait, what if it's Zethra who prophesied the coming of the necromancers? What if? All right, this is my universe idea. So Zethra has been reliving the cycle for eternity, because that's what's been happening to him. And so he's like, okay, I'm gonna try. It's Groundhog's Day, but with fantasy. I'm gonna try and fix the world, so maybe this evil can be defeated by all these good guys I'm gonna create.
Maybe.
There you go.
So what would you say is the theme of the two settings, if there is any?
It's more a case of, I thought the stories were contrasting colours. The paleness of the white worm story and the kind of brown desert sand colour of the other story. I thought it was very good contrast, and it would be interesting if one had a few weeks to do it, to analyse how the style reflects both of those settings. But also there's a similarity which I didn't actually realize at first until I started writing the analysis for the introduction, which is that they're both concerned with evil forces that don't know when to stop, and that's what, in a sense, defeats the evil. Um, so
I mean, the thing that defeats the necromancers is laziness, as it is the
yeah,
worm. To be honest,
yeah,
one's
yeah.
asleep, the other are like, "Oh yeah, just gonna use my
Mm.
undead prostitutes." You know, like whatever. I'll get my revenge on Tuesday. It's Monday still, right? I
Mm.
think it's laziness that kills these guys.
Mm.
I mean,
So,
it's
yeah.
very clear that they got complacent in the end. Except that I don't really feel like the worm is evil, to be quite honest. It feels to me
Well,
like the worm is more like a force of nature. It needs to
mm,
feed, and just like just like humans do, you keep a farm when you need to ensure a steady source of sustenance.
Yeah, sure,
mm,
but to our perspective, a giant worm that wants to, that kills everyone with cold, no matter how you dress it, actually, it's still evil. The first thing that he does in the
I
story
mean,
is kill everyone.
well, as I said, it feels more like a force of nature than
Right,
I would
I get it.
say I would say that the difference is, to me, the white worm is not necessarily malevolent, whereas the necromancers clearly
mm,
are.
mm.
I feel that the worm is malevolent, and I'll take you back to the story, to the story's beginning, because it's literally like this necromancer guy. He's the necromancer, the sorcerer guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's living in his house, everything is fine, and then the worm killed everyone, and he said, "All right, you're the only one who survived. Come with me. You'll be useful later." If he needs to eat people or whatever, I understand. All right, take all these people and put them into your little farm, but he just kills
Well,
indiscriminately.
I think in the story it is also described that the worm can only eat very particular. So if I remember correctly, the
Mm.
worm wants to keep a supply of sustenance about him, but only people with innate magical power can survive the transformation to deal with the cold he
I
exudes.
think you're right there. Yeah,
So
yeah.
for him, the killing of the whole bunch of villagers is like culling. Like,
Mm.
I'm not about to justify the worm's utter indifference, inhumane indifference, right? But it's not, to me, it's not the same as active malevolence like the necromancers. It
Mm.
just feels
Well,
different to me.
yeah. I suppose what you're saying is the worm is like a sort of black widow spider type thing, is hostile by its
Yes.
nature, whereas the necromancers made choices to
They
be.
made, yes, exactly. Yes, that's a great way to put it. They made the choice to be
Mm.
to be frolicking around dead people, you know what I mean?
Mm. But the worm is a bit is less than honest when he's asked what has happened to the other wizards, and he says,
Of
"This
course.
matter is a mystery, but ye shall all receive enlightenment in turn."
Well, it's not exactly lying, he's not exactly lying, is he? He's just being very
No,
coy.
yes.
It's like, oh,
Ex-
you
yeah.
need to start. You need to start your own podcast, XJ, where you're like justifying evil with XJ.
Bro, actually, that sounds like a terrific idea.
Go ahead. I gift it to you. It's yours.
Mm.
Justifying evil, yeah. Well, but like, again, like I said, to me, it's like no real difference to a human who takes a boiling kettle and pouring it down its pipe to kill off ants or whatever. It's like
Mm.
it's indifference, and it's very horrifying in its own way, but
Mm.
it's not active malevolence, I feel. Yeah. And I think
To me, mhm.
I think to me, one of the things that worked really well for the empire of necromancers is precisely because of that choice of malevolence. It makes everything more colorful, and it gives room for a writer to step into the shoes of this really utterly debased couple of human beings who would do that sort of stuff. Whereas it's a lot more. I speaking just for myself anyway, I would find it a lot more difficult to characterize a force of nature like the white worm. Yeah. Back to you, Nikki. You were going to say something.
Yeah, to me, the real interesting part about the coming of the white worm is the stark contrast of the power levels, right? So you've got this sorcerer who's living in his area, and he's the king there, basically, right? He's telling everyone what to do, and he's got this situation. Then something super strong, something incredibly powerful, comes, knocks at his doorstep, and says, "Come with me if you want to continue your existence." And then he meets all these other people who are sort of in the same power level as he. And what's really fascinating is that they never think of, oh, you know what? I mean, none of us are as strong as the worm alone, but together we could probably come up with something, all of us sorcerers, to just basically like enthrall the worm to us and make him do what we want, right? None of them come to that, and I think I think it's very true, and it's fascinating because this happens a lot in history, where somebody can convince thousands of people that they just don't have the acumen, the power, the ingenuity, the dexterity in order to do something about somebody else, right? And the people never realize that they, like, they would be stronger together, and they could just get rid of this person or this establishment or whatever, right? And I really like how, although it is a very alien creature, at least the white worm understands that part of human psychology, and he uses it to its fullest. And the only reason that the protagonist succeeds is because he has secret knowledge that he did not have before. Through who? Through all the people. Through all these other individuals who he should have teamed up in the first place. Right? But he can only do so at the end because now they have all lived and learned the lesson. Yeah. That's really what sells me to the story. Once you see that underline that goes through it, I think it really encapsulates the reason why Clark Ashton Smith chose the vehicle that he did. And someone learning about it at the end, while may seem cheap in XJ's eyes, and I certainly understand where he's coming from, he explained this point quite well. I am also not a fan of, and like a life-changing episode in a TV show, and then at the end of the episode, the character is like, "Oh, thank God, my daughter didn't go to college, and I didn't become a war veteran in Vietnam. It was all a dream. Hello, honey." You're just like, "Oh, cool." So there were no consequences to what happened. But I feel that
that is a perfect description of what I felt. Thank you, Nikki. It's how do I say this? It's anticlimactic.
Anticlimactic, yeah, for sure. But I did not feel like, I understand exactly what you mean, but I did not feel like that did that. Like the ending did that here. To me, at least. To me, it was instead like a message, right? Learn from us, and don't let it be that 12 other sorcerers have to die for you to get to this next time. I feel that was the message of someone learning this from this sorcerer.
Yeah, in other words, form a trade union, whether it be a trade union of wizards to resist the worm, or a trade union of animated corpses to resist the necromancers. So really, the two stories do point the same moral. In fact,
yes, form a trade union wherever you are.
The Empire of the Necromancers is about two awful imperialists coming in.
I just had an idea. The undead union. The union of zombies and ghouls.
You mean like they all come together, sit on little chairs, like,
No
hello,
more,
my name
no
is
more
Brains.
exploitation. I know we can go on forever, but please, it's not what we want. We demand Sundays.
A bunch of necromancers with cigars, like sitting in their big necromancer corp. We gotta do something about these corpses making unions.
I could, I could totally see that in the Terry Pratchett story.
Yeah, it's a very comedic aperture. I forgot completely where I was going, so never mind. I'm sorry, listeners. Oh yeah, okay. So the necromancers are basically a bunch of imperialists who come in to fight nobility. So I mean, there's no good side there, really. Anyway, I guess I don't have much else to say about either of the two stories. So, unless you guys have something that you want to bring up, I think we can go to the scores.
10 out of 10 for both. Yeah.
For both, yeah. I would give Coming of the White Worm a 9 out of 10. Just solely because there's one way that I wish it was and it isn't, and I know it's just a personal preference, but isn't that what the score is all about? I'm not being too objective here. And that is, I wanted there to be just a little bit more on the meetings of these sorcerers. Not just passing bys, but just one scene where we're actually sitting with them behind the camera, hearing them talk about, okay, so the White Worm wants to attack village A, B, and C. What do we do? And so on and so forth. And they're having these strategy discussions or whatever, right? Just something that would give a little bit more life into their daily situation before it all comes crumbling down. And as far as the Empire of the Necromancers, it's 10 out of 10. It's flawless. It's like looking into a mirror. It's perfect, just like me. There you go.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So I would give Coming of the White Worm 4 out of 10. It's not I don't dislike it, but it's also I'm just like very indifferent towards it. My life would not change in any way reading or not reading The Coming of the White Worm, which I suppose is kind of damning on its own right. The Empire of Necromancers, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It's really, really good. I very much enjoyed the fact that we are skin deep in the Necromancers' shoes, and we are also skin deep in the undead, which is not something which is very refreshing. It's not something that we would get to experience in usual fantasy fare. Yeah. And I think I like the structure of the Coming of the Empire of Necromancers a lot more than I do Coming of the White Worm. What about you, Rob? 10 out of 10 for both.
Yep, that's it. Yep.
I guess, you know what? I just figured it out. You don't have to say a lot if you're just giving a 10 out of 10 to everything. So this seems like a strategy.
Is that the reason why?
Definitely not.
Well, it's an endorsement of the story. I mean, I think that's what viewers need to do if they haven't already done it, is read the stories.
Yeah, definitely. Read, we always say read the stories, but both of them have my golden seal of approval. Give them a read.
Right.
All right. We seem to have came to a natural end to the podcast. And to our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. We are trying to improve the podcast. And if you have any suggestions on what we can do to make it better for you, please leave a comment in the comment section below and we will do our best. Thank you so much. and have a good day, good night, wherever you are.